Wonderful. Good afternoon, everybody. We have a very exciting seminar today with Professor Lina Dencik, who is University Research Lead at Goldsmiths University in the media department. It's going to be an interesting follow-up as part of some seminars that we've been running on matters of digital innovation and digital regulation. Lina has been a leader in this space for quite a few years because, first of all, she was the PI of the ERC grant at the University of Cardiff, data justice, which also led to, among many other things, to the production of the book that is very important on the debates around data justice. This was finished in December 2023, and now she has a new grant project in collaboration with the University of Pennsylvania and the University of Western Ontario. And so it's collaboration also across 3 different countries and regulatory regimes and industrial systems. It is titled Big Tech, Democracy and AI, and it's about lobbying, corporate activity, and how it shapes AI strategy. And that will really feed into the talk that we're going to hear today. We're gonna, as you know, the format, we're gonna have Lina give her talk now, and then we're gonna have a small break. We're going to keep it quite short because she needs to leave a little bit earlier than our usual format. After the little break, we have the questions and answers with the ECR allotted right to ask. Okay, great. Thank you, Lina, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Thanks so much, and I will try, and I think I'll speak for about sort of half an hour or so, so there should be time for plenty of discussion, I hope. So yeah, thank you everybody for inviting me to this talk at Exeter today. I'm very pleased to also discuss my work with colleagues that are both within, but I think perhaps today also outside of my field, or the audiences that I normally sort of speak with, and also to learn from these new and different perspectives. So thanks very much. I also want to start off by saying that what I am presenting today is very much work in progress. It's actually more an idea for a project that I'm hoping to be able to pursue if, you know, the gods of the funders decide. And so what I'm presented with is actually kind of more of a proposal for research that I think needs empirical investigation rather than a presentation of research that I've already carried out, even if it does build on work that I've done in the past. And I will go through some bits of work that I've done in the past that sort of informs the research that I want to pursue. And what I want to focus on here is the relationship between the welfare state and digital technology providers in the context of data-driven innovation, and perhaps most notably artificial intelligence or AI. And I want to do so because a lot of focus has been on the growth of large technology companies and the way AI might transform industries and consumption, but actually in comparison, very little on how it might transform the state. So today I want to reflect a bit on that question with a particular emphasis on the welfare state and the functions of the state oriented towards the protection and well-being of citizens. And in part, I'm sort of thought this was quite interesting. I don't know if I was talking about this earlier, if you saw this, but I'm interested in this question because I think there is a transformation happening in how the state is understanding its relation with providers of these technology, different to how we've understood service provision in the past, and also different to how we might think of privatization or marketization of the public sector. I think the nature of relations are different with technology providers of this type. So what I'm going to do in the talk, just to outline, is I'm going to first just justify why I think the welfare state is still an important aspect to look at when we're talking about the state, before then going into different features of state-tech relations that I think are important for thinking about how these relations are different to how we thought about service provision in the past. So first of all, just to justify my focus on the welfare state, So even though it has been dismissed as irrelevant sometimes, I think there has been an enduring significance of the welfare state, and that was evidenced in part by the unprecedented economic intervention and also renewed emphasis on social security and planning that was ushered in by the COVID-19 pandemic. Europe's responses in particular, which is the framework that I'm working within and thinking about, have been illustrative of its historical commitment to a so-called social dimension, often regarded as a neglected aspect of the European project. And also the pandemic showcased the extent to which that commitment is now bound up with digital technologies. In many ways, I think the pandemic can be regarded as a kind of juncture in the relationship between the state and digital technology, as governments across the world entered into a host of partnerships with organizations at unprecedented speed to extend and create data infrastructures in key areas of public and social life. In many ways, the pandemic made clear not only the continued relevance of the welfare state, but the datafied nature of the contemporary and future welfare state, in which data infrastructures and technology companies play a crucial role, fulfilling both coercive and supportive functions. And invoking the welfare state also allows for a kind of normative orientation towards the state, which I'm interested in, based on a set of specific values and also forms of regulation that focus on the capacity for political regulation of the market economy. Public values that are often associated with the welfare state include, for example, commitments to decommodification, social solidarity, and universalism. And here I'm also engaging with ideas around a European social model closely associated with the welfare state, even though the notion of a European social model has been deemed largely obsolete, both as an aspiration and reality, in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. However, it's important to note that following both the UK leaving the EU and the adoption of the European Commission's European Pillar of Social Rights, I think there are grounds for revisiting the European social model, both in terms of its intended purpose and also actual functioning. And also, we've done research that showed the extent to which there have been these growing efforts within European regulatory frameworks to try and account for this kind of commitment to a social dimension in the face of computational developments, such as initiatives like the EU's Platform Directive and also sections of the recently adopted AI Act that includes provisions pertaining to both social protection and employment. And at a national level, we've seen commitments expressed in the proliferation of guidelines of uses of data and AI in the public sector, for example, and also an emerging auditing sector, an algorithm auditing sector, and various revised remits of data protection agencies. And also there is a growing recognition amongst policy actors of the continued need to rethink the meaning of a European social model and the kind of unique set of challenges that are involved in transitioning this model to what I refer to as a European social technical model that's fit for purpose. So I think those are grounds for thinking about the datafied welfare state. And although it's kind of these issues have been foregrounded and compounded by the pandemic, along with rapid advancements in digital platforms and AI, the datafied welfare state, of course, follows a development that's been emerging in several European countries for some time. So it obviously didn't start with the pandemic. As Philip Alston, also the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights at the time, argued just prior to the onset of the pandemic. And this was when he carried out an inquiry into, I don't know if you remember, the impact of austerity in the UK. A key aspect he focused on was on the emergence of what he describes as the digital welfare state, and argued that this is already a reality or is emerging in many countries across the globe. As he says, we're witnessing the gradual disappearance of the post-war British welfare state behind a web page and an algorithm. In its place, the digital welfare state is emerging. And he says, in these states, systems of social protection and assistance are increasingly driven by digital data and technologies that are used to automate, predict, identify, surveil, detect, target, and punish. Reports have documented, for example, how users of automated decision-making or decision support systems that rely on this algorithmic processing of data within public bodies are now well established across Europe, most notably in areas of unemployment, benefits, social care, policing, education, and health. And also in research that I've led, we explored the use of data for predictive analytics within the public sector in the UK, describing the advent of citizen scoring, is what we described it as, which we defined as the use of data analytics in government for the purposes of categorization, assessment, and prediction at both individual and population. So this includes uses such as allocating treatment in public health systems, sorting the unemployed, identifying child neglect, or detecting benefit fraud that have all been reported in welfare states across Europe. And so just to show about some of the things that we are talking about, we're talking about the datafied welfare state. So this is based on research that we did at the Data Justice Lab into public sector uses of particularly predictive analytics, which is what we were interested in. And these are outdated in that they're from the sort of 2018, 2019, but that's when we were doing our research, and these are some of the reports that are written as an outcome of that research. And we looked at, we've filed freedom of information requests to all local authorities and councils across the UK to ask them about their uses. We can talk about that as a method if you want later, but found out that actually it was fairly widespread, although there was a kind of lack of understanding of what it really meant. But then we also did a number of case studies with particular local authorities that we knew had put certain systems in place that showcase, for example, the Bristol one, which uses a think family. It's called a model that is used to try and predict the likelihood of child exploitation in various forms by creating a literal risk score, a percentage, in terms of how likely they are to be a victim based on previous victims of child exploitation. So they were putting together at that time about 35 different social data sets to produce a prediction of a risk score in the sense, and that would then inform various actions. So these are the kinds of things. Of course, they would have been advanced now more, as but also with the advent of AI. These are the kinds of things that we're talking about when we're talking about the datafied welfare state. We also looked, in my data justice project, around we looked also at policing and the use of these capabilities in policing, not just for neighborhood mapping, which I think is the most sort of well-known use of these kinds of technologies, which is where you essentially, based on previous arrest records and so forth, try and predict what areas are most likely to have experiences of crime. But actually, we also found the use of lists. So people put on various lists. I think the gang matrix is, of course, the most famous of these kinds, where based on various forms of relations, people would be added to this matrix or this database, either as a potential victim or as a part of a gang. And actually, one of the cases we looked at as well was a European-wide initiative that was trying to create so it's called SIT, the Speaker Identification Integrated Project, where it's voice identification database to try and, again, predict crime and terror, or acts of terror, or actual terrorists who might be a terrorist, based on all kinds of voice data from across the open source internet, as they like to call it. So that was the kinds of things that we're also thinking about here. And then also, just to give another insight, I think there's someone doing looking at borders and uses of technology at borders. We also looked at that. And for example, this is based on a case study we did of a project called iBorder Control, which was funded by the European Commission. It's always interesting, how when it gets funded by the European Commission. Obviously, our project was funded by the European Commission, but this project was also funded by the European Commission, which was piloted across a number of different European borders. And it's essentially a facial recognition system trying to predict bona fide versus non-bona fide travelers based on interviews. And I mean, it is a very curious thing to have been funded if you look into it, because it was actually, based on 31 actors, and that's supposed to be then used on a general population. It's kind of bizarre when you look into these kinds of things, but I suppose it showcases the obsession with trying to create or support security technologies that are used at borders. But that's, again, kind of a different aspect, another aspect of that we're looking at and thinking about when we're talking about this sort of increased datafication of various state functions. And then finally, we also looked at work, actually. It's a kind of important aspect too to think about, where I think we know about this, the increasing the advent of algorithmic management within the workplace. The one area we looked at in particular was hiring and the uses of AI for automated systems for, not all of them AI, for ranking or assessing, profiling potential applicants, which obviously exploded during the pandemic and has become a massive industry now. And we looked at that also too as a growing trend, where again you have kind of these interesting actors taking on kind of essential functions in terms of how we think about social distribution, right, in society. So this is another aspect we're thinking about. So that's just to give you an indication of the kinds of trends that informs this question about what this means for state-tech relations. Okay. Importantly, the turn to data-driven innovation in public bodies has overwhelmingly been advanced as an efficiency measure, with implications for administrative processes rather than a policy intervention that has political ramifications. So in many cases, these systems are introduced as pilots, they're introduced as efficiency measures, not as policy interventions, even though arguably they have consequences for policy in terms of what types of priorities are advanced. And this is also despite concerns being raised both within and outside public bodies about impacts on citizen rights and professional practices, accountability and democracy that have sought to illustrate how the uses of these types of technologies may also cause harm. So for example, in my own work, I've advanced this kind of research agenda that tries to account for the social justice implications of the growing reliance on data-driven technologies under this framework of data justice that foregrounds how the uses of such technologies might impact different communities in disparate ways. However, in these discussions, there has been a kind of tendency to focus on the data systems themselves, attributing harm to kind of technological features or aspects of algorithmic design, for example, algorithmic bias, without really proper engagement with the wider context or relations that surround them. And also, while there have been this kind of growing concerns about the rapid escalation of the technology industry and the sort of societal position it now occupies, we really lack an adequate focus on how this development also intersects with the role and transformations of the state. Where this kind of focus has been advanced, I would say, has been dominated by questions of security and the use of technologies for state surveillance, for example, which was, particularly prominent in the aftermath of the Snowden leaks published in 2013. And I think this has distracted from the kind of more mundane and everyday features and functions of the state, limited understanding of the way the growing power of technology companies has intermingled with, rather than disregarded, governments as platforms and AI systems take on roles and functions associated with the state. So I think there's been a tendency to think that technology companies just sideline states. And I actually think it's a more complicated relationship than that. So we still struggle to understand what a kind of data-fed welfare state entails, how it operates, and crucially, what this relationship with digital technologies providers is. And the welfare state, I think, serves as a useful lens to explore these kind of questions, because on the one hand, it allows for this normative orientation towards the purpose and parameters of the state that explicitly engages everyday functions like the delivery of public services, but also because, on the other hand, debates on the welfare states have long invoked concerns about the growing reliance on private actors and an orientation towards serving market interests. Right, so we have for a long time been concerned about the privatization of the welfare state. And this requires us to consider the state not as a static object, but as a social relation, subject to the dynamics of change from different forces over time. And also that the welfare state is simultaneously instrumental to contemporary citizenship, while also historically threatened and undermined by shifting ideological frameworks like neoliberalism, for example. So in this case, the welfare state is about not simply a program of social welfare or not simply about the provision of social services, but what I'm interested in here is in line with authors who talks about the welfare state as a formula that consists of the explicit obligation of the state apparatus to provide assistance and support to those citizens who suffer from specific needs and risks characteristic of the market society, and is based on a recognition of the formal role of labor unions in both collective bargaining and the formation of public policy. So this understanding requires us to consider the datafied welfare state beyond engagements with the digitalization of public administration and delivery of public services, which I think there's been research on, and instead think about how this advent of platforms and AI relate to institutional formations and state function, and also therefore what political realities are possible. So as Uffe argues, there was nothing inevitable about the emergence of the welfare state. The welfare state in Europe is a political solution to social contradictions that emerged out of what he describes as a specific matrix of social power. So it's an outcome of the ways in which social classes, collective actors, and other social categories were able to shape the environment of political decision-making. So I'm interested in thinking about it in these terms because I want to also question what is possible, what political realities are possible in the current matrix of social power that we have, particularly in terms of the relationship between state and technology providers. So in particular, I'm presenting a hypothesis that I'm going to try and justify, and that I'm going to engage with 4 different features of state-tech relations in the data-fied welfare state, and want to make the case that we are witnessing the advent of what I call a tenant state, in which state-tech relations mimic those of tenant landlords based on new modes of governance, infrastructural dependencies, economic models, and regulatory capacities that challenge definitions of a European social model. And this notion of a tenant state builds on kind of emerging debates on the future of public institutions as operations of the state are increasingly executed through computational infrastructures, and also engages with these ongoing discussions about their potential displacement in the face of new forms of platform or computational power at the intersection of governance, infrastructure, and market. And these debates kind of push the parameters for how we should understand the intersection of the state and technology, also pointing to the kind of complexity and multifaceted nature of computational transformations that suggest that existing frameworks for analyzing this relationship may be inadequate. Instead, we might have to understand state-tech relations as both extending but also shifting previous forms of state capital hybrids and public-private partnerships, involving several key significant features of state-tech relations that I'm going to detail now. So the first one I want to focus on is governmentality. And obviously these features are all interrelated and connected and so forth. They're not distinct. Our key focus in research on the growing reliance on data infrastructure in the welfare state is the way this reliance shapes public administration and the delivery of public services. So my own and others' research, for example, has shown how the increasing use of data-driven technologies in the public sector has been significant for changes in expertise, decision-making, and engagement with citizens across public sector bureaucracies. So Karen Young, she summarized some of this debate as what she describes as a paradigm shift in public administration from a regime of new public management, as we're familiar with under neoliberalism, to a new regime, a regime of new public analytics, which is associated with the use of computational analysis that has its theoretical foundations in data science and in statistics. So this suggests a kind of potential transition in governmentality, which I understand here as the techniques and strategies by which a society is rendered governable, that is distinct from previous modes of governance and statecraft. So also building on James C. Scott's account of the high modernist state, in the book Seeing Like a State, you might be familiar with, Foucault and Gordon, for example, they argue that we've moved from this high modernist state to the neoliberal state to what they refer to today as the dataist state. So in an age of big data and machine learning, they argue, the state's use of technologies heralds a deeper transformation of statecraft itself. It does so because automation takes over significant parts of state operations and governance becomes oriented towards the identification and legibility that's afforded through the ubiquitous collection of data. So this data state, they argue, embodies a new form of governmentality, premised on the notion that a society consists of data flows. The responsibility of the state is to collect and process this data, and a well-governed society, in the data state, is one in which events are aligned with the state's models and predictions, no matter how disorderly in high modernist terms, right? So this is a potential transformation in governmentality. Obviously, this requires empirical investigation, which I will carry out if I get it from here. Okay, and the second feature is infrastructure that I think is very important, right? Importantly, the data state, of course, is a culmination of the commingling of private and public actors that is afforded by technology and this long-standing reorientation of the state to serve the market. So by privileging, and I think this is really key, by privileging data flows and models and predictions that are garnered from data processing and analysis, the data estate is subject to competition from any institution able to make better predictions or deliver better outcomes under this new governmentality, right? And this tends to therefore move governance into the hands of large corporations who have the computational power and labor to process and analyze large data sets. So the enhanced dependency and concentration that comes with this power of compute has foregrounded this kind of infrastructural approach to understanding platforms and AI. And here I understand that as both highlighting the potential public value and embedded nature of these technologies in society, but also the complex ecosystem that sustain them. So we know that research on public sector platforms and applications, for example, has highlighted how central aspects of delivering welfare in European welfare states are now bound up with convoluted third-party infrastructures based on different forms of tracking, storing, and controlling data. A key question for the data-fied welfare state is therefore what an engagement with data-driven technology at an infrastructural level might reveal about state-tech relations in this current matrix of social power, and also how this matrix might signal potential discontinuities in capitalism. So Ward, for example, has argued that this infrastructural power that technology companies now hold has shifted power away from the capitalist class, who own the means of production, as we've traditionally understood power in capitalism, towards a new victorialist class, as Ward describes it, who own the vectors along which information is gathered and used. So while a capitalist class owns the means of production, the means of organizing labor, a victorialist class owns the means of organizing the means of production. Right? It's this undercurrent infrastructural power, right, that Work argues now creates a kind of class of the ones who own the vectors of information, the patents, copyrights, software, the compute, power of compute. Alongside, and my third feature that I want to engage with in state-tech relations is rentierism. So alongside an emphasis on infrastructure, datafication has been said to be a political economic regime linked to trends of assetization and financialization, in which data is both valuable but also value creating, propelling new ways of doing business and governance. And the aim is to turn everything into a financial asset as a way to latch onto surplus of capital and consumption for the purposes of rent extraction, whether that be in the form of money or in the form of data. So payment to an economic actor is made purely by virtue of that actor controlling something valuable or that creates an impression of value, made profitable due to the particular circumstances of a dearth of market competition or monopoly. So although this logic of rentier capitalism is not new for capital, what is new are these complex technologies that have been designed to extend and empower capital's abilities of assetization, extraction, and enclosure. And also importantly, the main strategy of rentiers is to turn social interactions and economic transactions into services that take place on their platform, extending the kind of software as a service model into spheres like transport as a service or indeed welfare as a service. So this builds also on insights into the significance of moving from selling one-off shrink software to this new model, production model, agile production model in computing and engineering, which now dominates, of course, that privilege these software as a service products. So by understanding this development through the lens of rentierism as a dominant economic model of data-driven innovation, we can see how technologies companies advancing these X as a service products become embedded within government and public sector bureaucracies. So Tamar Sharon has talked about it in terms of the development, or has talked about this development as sphere transgressions that see this digital know-how and expertise translate into advantages for technology companies in all spheres undergoing digitalization, from healthcare to education to social security, regardless of their lack of domain expertise. So simply by virtue of having digital expertise, they're able to gain advantage in all these other domains where they actually don't have any expertise. And also importantly, by plugging into this political economy of datafication, to this logic of rentier capitalism, the datafied welfare state therefore not only advances the commodification of information about its citizens and the outsourcing of services, but it also becomes locked in to a kind of form of social ordering this constant need for optimization when you get a software as a service product that actually restructures practices to uphold this political economy. It's much harder to come out of that kind of arrangement than if you were buying a one-off Shriek software. Again, and finally, this question then of political regulation. So a key concern, therefore, is the extent to which state-tech relations in the datafied welfare state are conducive to the capacity for political regulation of the market economy, particularly perhaps in negotiating between capital and labour as a key feature of the European social model. So research done together with Dencik Nicholas, for example, on the place on social and economic rights in recent policy debates on AI within Europe, has shown that these tend to be subsumed within a market-oriented approach that favours a kind of political orientation towards consumer and civic rights. And also the ability of platforms to both create and control markets has been shown to undermine and bypass any formal role of labour unions, continuing to challenge regulatory mechanisms in place to protect citizens against market risks. This is particularly important, I think, in light of discussions that are, I think, only kind of emerging now on national growth strategies, showing that the overriding objective of digital growth that's really dominated welfare states' strategies in Europe paradoxically produced retrenchment of welfare state capabilities and critical assets. So Mazzucato and Collington, for example, made the case that a key aspect of this retrenchment is not only the transfer of expertise to private actors, but the obfuscation of accountability that comes with the way that these actors are now embedded at the center of government operations. So there is, in other words, a significant tension and actually a possible contradiction between the advancements of platforms and AI as industrial policy and the capacity for the datafied welfare state to meet its obligations towards citizens. So these features, therefore, I think, indicate that state-tech relations in the datafied welfare state may be giving rise to new institutional form, what I refer to as the tenant state, that has significant implications for the functions of the welfare state and any commitments to a European social model. In fact, I think there might be grounds for rethinking what tools and responses are needed to engage with this institutional form, and whether those that have been leveraged in response to neoliberalism, for example, and this is something I'm very interested in, this question of whether the kind of responses that we have had when we talk about privatisation in the welfare state under neoliberalism, which is often an emphasis on public ownership, or an emphasis on bringing services in-house, or nationalising various kind of private ownership of infrastructure, whether that actually makes sense in this constellation, considering these features of state-tech relations that I have presented. Are those responses actually going to be adequate for this new institutional form that I'm arguing we might be confronted with? So do we need new conceptual tools? Do we need other ways of thinking about what the welfare state might look like in this kind of formation? And also we might have to consider how the current matrix of social power that underpins the tenant state can be challenged to allow for other social technical models to be imagined, and consider what other political realities might therefore also be possible. And that's actually where I'm going to end. I think it's half an hour on the dot, so thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lina.